Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today, we're going to discuss the wrestling media and the sort of, I guess you could say, the Borg that is starting to form, or that they want to form, in which everybody has to stand on code and there's no deviation from code in any way. So there's going to be very little individuality between these various sites. But it's a lot of moral grandstanding that is occurring on wrestling media right now, social media especially, where there's a lot of moral busybodies who are not just critiquing people who were sued for sex trafficking, not just the people who might have known about folks' sex trafficking, but now they're starting to attack people who had nothing to do with it, who are nowhere near it. They're starting to attack people for not asking about it, for not wanting to talk about it, for not being as obsessed with it as they are. And it's now growing not just from that situation, but to any and all situations. So what do I mean? Let's start backwards. Chris Van Vliet is the subject here. Chris Van Vliet sat down, did an interview with Matt Riddle. As soon as he started posting about his interview with Matt Riddle, people started to attack him for talking to Matt Riddle. There's no need to talk to Matt Riddle. We'll get into some of that stuff in a second. But he also got a similar thing when he talked to the Velveteen Dream. There was a lot of people being very negative about his interview with the Velveteen Dream. But I realized then that there's a pattern starting to form. John Alba goes on Twitter, and then Brandon Thurston did the same thing, and they started attacking other wrestling journalists for not asking Triple H about the Vince McMahon lawsuit. And you realize that there's a position that they want to push, and they will not they will not let people get away from that position. So here we're going to be reading a lot of articles. We're going to be reading a lot of the screeds that are going to be written about this subject. I apologize if this video is too long, but I want to give people the general idea of what's going on between the tastemakers in wrestling social media, the creme de la creme, the tippy top of these guys, WrestleNomics, Fightful, etc. So John Alba, who was representing Fightful at the Royal Rumble scrum, he went the next day after Royal Rumble and posted out from his notes page this following segment. I'm going to read it all. And I'm going to read all of Brandon Thurston's as well. It says, "I'll be candid. While I'm genuinely very grateful for many of the complimentary words passed towards me and a few colleagues today, I feel largely pretty uncomfortable with the discourse going around. Reporters asking questions shouldn't be newsworthy. Asking questions is quite literally part of our job. Sure, there are some hard questions asked in the press conference Saturday night, but I don't personally believe in any way that occurring should carry news value. The subject at hand that should have been the central focus at discourse, however, is the most newsworthy piece of information to come out of the industry in decades. What makes it newsworthy is that it affects almost everyone in the periphery of the arena. Directly, the individuals involved. Beyond that, talent, employees, executives, sponsors, consumers, and others feel ripple effects of what is being alleged against maybe the most significant figure in the history of our realm of entertainment. Honest, concise, good-faith questions to anyone under that umbrella were and are fair game to me as far as I see it." Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. That's pretty good. "This ain't a game of gotcha," he says. "There are no personal vendettas. I have nothing against any individual I cover, and if I did, I'd recuse myself from that situation. That's what you do. But the freedom of the press is built on the principle of holding institutions accountable. Asking valuable, necessary questions that serve to provide transparency and answers is paramount to fulfilling the privilege of having an opportunity to be in that setting. The PR professionals involved in this particular instance have been understanding of that and do not censor or restrict access." Now, in other tweets, both John Alba and Brandon Thurston, as a way of trying to coax other people into following their lead to incentivize them, they kept tweeting about how great the WWE PR team was. And I was wondering why they're giving them so much credit. But the point is, they think other people did not ask questions about Vince McMahon because they were worried about access. All right. which could be the case. But it became clear to me that they want people to follow their lead and saying, it's okay, they didn't do anything to me, they're not going to do anything to you, get on code. Now, what makes me think that is the very next line in this sentence. I don't reserve the right to tell my colleagues what they should and shouldn't ask. Everyone has their own priorities, and I understand that and I respect that. All I can say is I don't think asking tougher questions would be considered newsworthy if everyone understood that asking what needs to be asked comes with the territory of access. Once those matters are addressed, other less pressing subjects can be approached. So he's saying we need to talk about one thing and then we could talk about everything else. So now I get it, prioritizing, but not everybody's priorities are the same, right? Not everybody wants to get into the muck and the mire of every single outrage issue. And I'm glad that he started with the I don't reserve the right to tell my colleagues what they should and shouldn't ask, but you are kind of shaming them. This is shaming language. Basically, shame on you for not asking about this question, not asking about Vince McMahon or whatever. It doesn't need to be about Vince. Whatever the situation is at that time, you are supposed to be asking about that. That is your job, and according to John Alba. All right. So this is his final paragraph. I've always welcomed conversation with others in the field, and will continue to keep my door open should anyone ask to bounce things off me. But I hope we can get to a place soon where asking basic and necessary questions is no longer newsworthy. I do think we could have done better, and believe we will going forward. Now, this is John Alba. He's very milquetoast. He's a lot like Chris Van Vliet in a way. Very straight-laced. Can't really complain too much about him. He doesn't do anything wrong. He always says the right thing, does the right thing. Just a somewhat genuine guy. Now, Brandon Thurston is a little bit more brutal. He says, quote, and this is from Twitter, and this was written 2 hours before John Alba's tweet. I respect everyone has different goals in wrestling media, but we only get to ask only a few questions per month to WWE EVP Paul Levesque and rarely have access to any other executive. A sex trafficking lawsuit was filed a few days ago against 3 parties, Vince McMahon himself, John Laurinaitis, and the company itself, WWE. It alleges sex trafficking and sexual assault, including claims of instances inside of WWE HQ. But not only that, Janelle Grant says multiple executives, at least 4, who were anonymized, and we can't rule out Levesque or Nick Khan among them, had knowledge of the relationship between she, an entry-level employee, and Vince McMahon, the CEO, and did nothing to intervene. Keep in mind, WWE itself disclosed in 2022 that there are multiple additional NDAs between Vince and other women whose stories we barely know anything about. Given the context and profoundly disturbing accusations, to ask Levesque about any other subject last night in particular is a disservice to the industry and the people in it. He's not done. But here's the thing. They're trying to create the code. You have to stand on code. Look, how many questions? How many times are you going to ask the same question? In this embryonic stage, 4 or 5 people asking the same question from different angles. You're looking at this corpse from the same way. It's not going to change. All right? So you're going to basically have 14, 15 people ask the same question because you feel like this is so important to do. All right? So he continues. Even if further questions produce only bits of transparency or non-answers, those responses and the media's attention to the subject send a message to the public and business partners. If every question would have been about by far the most important wrestling story this week or this decade, it would have sent a more resounding signal regardless of the responses. Instead, it feels that there's some headroom where WWE can evade questions about sexual misconduct at the company, a possible cover-up, and instead get to talk about the great business run they're on and how today's product compares to the Attitude Era. So you're not allowed, you got to smother them with the same damn thing. It's an interesting bit. It's okay for you to do what you want to do. It's not okay for you to tell other people what they must do or what they should do. All right? In this situation, these guys are trying to shame people for who did not ask about Vince to a person who is not really that involved in it. Triple H is not involved in this situation. If he was, they would have named him. Unless we know more information, until we get more information, he's not really involved in this. Okay? So he continues, because Brandon Thurston wrote a long thing. Having access carries a responsibility that sometimes matters less, but last night mattered a lot. And half of the questions to Levesque were about relatively trivial subjects. I don't mean to put anyone down, but many stories, including this one, involve complicated details. If you feel unsure what to ask, I find talking with other reporters about possible good questions help. My DMs are open too, and I have a dozen questions I could have shared. Meaning, if you didn't know what to ask, or you didn't know how to ask it, or whatever the case may be, you should have just asked me and asked my second question, because I'm only going to get one. You can ask my second question. I'll give you a question that you can ask that will keep you on code. You get to stay on code, and I'll help you stay on code. All right? This is interesting, right? Because instead of just saying, well, everybody don't want to talk about this thing because it is intricate. It involves legal matters, and people might not understand, how to approach the subject. Some people run a website essentially for fun. They're not trying to get into the nitty gritty of this kind of stuff. Other people are just not interested, right? But understand, this is only meant to be done one way. I know you think that what they're saying is good, and it's not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. What I'm saying is, eventually you'll realize when you start getting on code, then they start giving you directives. Then they're going to start telling you, this is the only way you're supposed to approach this subject. He continues, and this is the last paragraph. If you're afraid of losing access, I can only speak for myself. I have never been dissuaded before or after, and I think WWE anticipates what kind of questions I'm going to ask before I'm called upon, which they've done at each presser I've attended. And ultimately, there are things more important than access, like transparency and accountability. These are empty words, by the way. These are very empty words. Accountability, transparency. Well, these things only matter to certain people. Nobody asked to see Tony Khan's budget or his bank statements, right? He doesn't. He's not going to. What about, where's the transparency? There's not going to be any transparency. But here's my thing. How many of these people, and there have been many. I know that there have been several YouTubers. There have been a lot of podcasters that have brought in attorneys. I know, I believe it was Post Wrestling. They brought in an attorney. I believe WrestleNomics, which also works with Post Wrestling, has brought in attorneys. They are trying to argue this case through attorneys and through, which is good. You're supposed to bring in legal professionals when you're talking about a legal issue, but they're not scrutinizing this thing. They're all just, it's an outrage. It's horrible. Here's how it could affect business. Here's who the sponsors are. Did you see the sponsors? We ought to boycott. We ought to do this. We ought to do that. Again, they're creating a code. They're not trying to foment understanding. They're not trying to say, how can people better understand the situation that is being shoved in their face pretty much all day? How can you better understand what is the context of this situation? People are not asking, it'd be one thing if you had, a story and you're looking at it from various different angles. It's not. You're not looking at things from various different angles. You're looking at things from one angle, and then you must browbeat everyone else from looking at this to look at this same subject the way that you are looking at it. So Jonathan Snowden, who is a wrestling journalist, he's also an MMA journalist. He wrote the book on Ken Shamrock that I read, and I thought it was very good. And he even started talking about this, but he actually gave them a little bit of pushback. Jonathan Snowden is known for being a little bit more, he's a little bit on the rougher edge, meaning he doesn't exactly follow the trends. He's on the train, but he kind of sits in the back and watches. Sometimes he'll join in, but most of the time he's just sitting in the back. So on his Substack, he said this: on Twitter, each question is judged by a handful of extremely critical posters, many on the fringes of wrestling journalism. Most of them have never worked in the media and don't necessarily understand that members of the press may have different roles and goals. Even established reporters like Brandon Thurston from WrestleNomics may not always have a wide-reaching understanding of how media works for a professional journalist. Thurston, who does a great job covering the business side of the industry, wrote a damning screed criticizing any of his peers who asked Levesque about something other than the McMahon scandal. As someone who is hired to write feature stories about WWE events, I can't say I agree. I understand Thurston's passion. I read the lawsuit, putting me a step ahead of key WWE executives apparently, and felt it was important to address in some form. But I also understand there are times in my career where I wouldn't have had the freedom or inclination to do so. Here's an example. My first and only time covering the Royal Rumble. I traveled to Houston, courtesy of Bleacher Report, constructing a story about the way WWE used the January pay-per-view to launch careers and make stars. I got perspective from legends like Stone Cold Steve Austin, contemporary stars like Seth Rollins, and yes, Paul Levesque. While WWE wasn't doing press conferences routinely at the time, I wouldn't have used my opportunity to ask anyone about the scandal of the day. That wasn't the story I'd been hired to write, and it would have been a disservice to my employer to get sidetracked. Bleacher Report was paying thousands of dollars to send me to an event and publish what was essentially a short story about Austin. I wasn't there to write about anything else, no matter how compelling. Many of the media critics online lose track of the fact that a press event isn't intended as a circus show where people try to establish their journalism credentials. He put journalism in quotations. By asking questions no one is going to answer for an audience of hardcore fans who are going to be unhappy regardless. It's a place for the working press to get the building blocks they need for their coverage. Now, he's going to continue, but my goodness, isn't that... He's not saying that this isn't the place for your virtue signaling, but that's what he's saying, right? Like, not everybody's there to virtue signal. Not everybody's there to go online and say, I ask the tough questions because I'm a hard-hitting capital J journalist. He's not doing that. He's saying some people have different roles. They run different accounts. They're doing different things. You can't be mad at other people are doing something other than what you want to do. But he's doing a little bit of pushback. He says, he continues, he's going to give Thurston some more credit. Thurston is right that the McMahon story is absolutely a critical story. People should ask about it. But there might also be journalists there covering the Royal Rumble event generally, writing about a specific topic or athlete, or simply taking a more lighthearted approach to wrestling coverage. For people who work for a larger outlet, there may be someone else addressing the McMahon lawsuit, leaving the journalists at the presser free to hit other topics. They are under no obligation to sacrifice their own stories in order to ask about something unrelated to their angle of attack just to appease an online mob. Yes, you are correct. Not everybody has to be on code. Everybody is going to have a different approach. You can't create this standard of this is what journalism is. For starters, most of you guys have no earthly idea what you're talking about anyway. You're bulls in china shops trying to make a mess of things, trying to get headlines and trying to get sound bites and all this kind of stuff. You're not actually trying to get people to understand the story. And I don't think anything's wrong with the question John Alba asked or the question that Brandon Thurston asked outside of they knew they were not going to get any answers. Not any straight answers anyway. So Jonathan Snowden continues. No one in the media is responsible to anyone but their employer and their audience. The McMahon story is a legitimate and important one, but so is a piece on Cody's reaction to winning the event for a second time and what it means to see his family in the front row cheering him on. If you don't get that, maybe it's best to leave the media criticism to people with a more holistic understanding of the job. Yes. I could not agree more. There needs to be wiggle room for some people who want to do lighthearted, fun stories, who are writing specifically about certain subjects or writing about accommodations, writing about the event, the building, the business element, whatever. You can ask your question, Thurston. You can ask your question, John Alba. I will hear the answers given, and I may add that to a different story, or whatever the case may be. But I'm here for a specific purpose. And hey, these events are not easy to get to because, usually reporters have to travel from wherever they live to these big events. And I understand Brandon Thurston's position as well. If you're going to travel from your home, you might as well get a soundbite out of it. You might as well get a clip out of it. At the same time, though, this is not what journalism is. Journalism reporting isn't, I'm just going to ask the tough questions. It is also getting down in the nitty gritty. Thurston does that a little bit, but he only does it from one side. John Alba does it a little bit. He only does it from one side. Nobody has talked to an attorney and says, how would you defend against this kind of lawsuit? What is an appropriate defense? What is wrong with this? What is going on with this? It's just, how bad could this possibly get for WWE or in TKO? And how horrible is Vince McMahon? And how horrible is this? It's like, okay, how about we take a more, like Jonathan Snowden said, a more holistic approach? If you're going to keep talking about this subject, it gets boring if you keep talking about it from the same perspective. You can only get so outraged, bruh. And there's only so much outrage one person can deal with at a time. Now, because you can only get so outraged, I'm sorry, not everything reaches the level of outrage. So this brings us to Chris Van Vliet, which I know it took us a long time to get here. But Chris Van Vliet online is taking a lot of heat for interviewing Matt Riddle. He took a lot of heat for interviewing Patrick Clark, the Velveteen Dream. And people are online absolutely going after this guy. And I think it started with this young lady by the name of Stephanie Chase. She is a wrestling journalist. I don't remember where she works for. I think she does her YouTube channel. But she started this whole thing by saying Ric Flair, Velveteen Dream, Hulk Hogan, and now Matt Riddle. All names Chris Van Vliet has interviewed in the past 3 months. Chris puts on a nice smile, but he doesn't have enough integrity not to take a stand against men accused of sexual abuse and a racist. His pinned tweet is The Rock telling him what a great guy he is and how he'll be a great dad, but he clearly has no intention of wanting to make our business a better place. Accused of something? Rehab your image with Chris. I get a lot of people, especially in media, won't want to public support me saying this because he's a, quote, nice guy. But this is the moment where people need to take a hard look at who they support and platform. And if you disagree, just go line his pockets more. That's all it's about in the end. If you have the stomach for it, listen to the closing 10 minutes or so of his Riddle interview. Just a couple of dads bonding. She continues after she got a little bit of criticism. Last thing I'll say on this tonight. If you want to accuse me of trying to make my name by calling out Chris, you have no idea how this industry works. I knew before I hit send I'd probably hurt myself more than dent Chris, and I'm totally fine with that because it needed to be said. I've read a ton of replies today, some defensive of the worst men in this business, including Vince. But that's the fan base Chris now courts with his anti-cancel culture crowd that allows the accused to be platformed while the victims never get that amplification. Because you guys talking about this stuff constantly to the point where people's eyes bleed. It's not, platforming. Now, we're talking about Chris Van Vliet, but more importantly, we're talking about Matt Riddle. And nobody's dander gets up about Matt Riddle more than David Bixenspan. He went on an absolute tirade against Chris Van Vliet for daring to interview Matt Riddle. He says, honest to God, I don't give a fuck about being polite anymore. Fuck you, Chris Van Vliet, for platforming this idiot, multiple time credibly accused sexual predator as a lovable stoner chuckle fuck and not asking a single hard question or even jumping on any of the openings he left you. and doubly so for closing with a fucking Tony Robbins quote. What the actual fuck is wrong with you? It comes across like you're doing this shit on purpose. So you got to be on code. He has decided that Matt Riddle is quote unquote credibly accused of rape, and therefore you're not allowed to talk to him. You're not allowed to have any conversations about this. And he continues saying this is fucking embarrassing and gross in so many ways, including how Chris Van Vliet doesn't say anything when Riddle almost mentions the JFK airport incident just before the halfway mark and then thinks the better of it. He goes on and on and on. By the way, it's not a good idea to use a screenshot of an article about one of Matt Riddle's ex-girlfriends who's accused him of sexual abuse, going off on him, even if the article is from Ringside News, to illustrate dumb articles written about me in the intro for your interview with him. He says, am I crazy for thinking that using a Tony Robbins quote at the end of the Matt Riddle podcast and in the description with all the awful shit that he's been accused of shows that Chris Van Vliet knows exactly what he's doing and just doesn't give a shit? Then he continues, Chris Van Vliet's rundown of the topics of his interview with Matt Riddle is absolutely pathetic. Then he says, Chris Van Vliet's interview podcast closes with a 26-minute post roll. How much is he getting paid for ads that literally nobody is listening to? I mean, he's just going on and on. Now he's talking about Chris Van Vliet's sponsors. Interviewing Matt Riddle is already a choice. Doing it on your podcast that's sponsored by BetterHelp and Blue Chew, while closing on the show notes with an inspirational quote from a multiple-time credibly accused sexual predator Tony Robbins, is a whole nother choice on top of that. I mean, he's just going on. He wants to destroy Chris Van Vliet. Him and this young lady, Stephanie Chase, they're absolutely bloodthirsty about this whole thing. How much outrage do you really need to function, bro? That's what I want to know. Like, when do you let up and just start having fun? When do you let up and just chill? Maybe somebody needs to just ask Chris Van Vliet, hey, what is the purpose of this interview with Matt Riddle? It might just be a chill interview that he wants to do. It's not everything is 60 minutes where you sit down and you're going to grill this guy about this situation. This is not Meet the Press. Chris Van Vliet has never done like deep investigative interviews. He does chill sit down with it. He does like things where, like when he talked to Karrion Kross, right? He didn't sit down with Karrion Kross and grill him about, why did they leave Impact, and did Don Callis sexually harass his wife. He didn't do any of that crap. He wasn't doing it then. Why should he do it now? The only real sit down interview where he actually tried to get into the nook and crannies of things was the Velveteen Dream interview. Everything Chris Van Vliet does is fluff. Everything he does is fluff. He does not do the kind of stuff that everybody wants him to do. So he's going to be attacked. Fuck you. We're going to stick all of our nerds all on you. They're going to form like Voltron and attack you and attack your show and attack your sponsors. What is going on here? Because he's off code. The code is you're only supposed to criticize. You're never supposed to platform. This whole thing is very bizarre. It's very, very bizarre. And it takes a certain kind of person, terminally online, activist type to have the energy for this. And it only tells me that either there's a emotional element to it or there's a financial element to it. One or the other. I don't believe anybody cares this much about other people's lives and all this kind of stuff. Either it's a job, and I know that, some of these people are trying to get Substack money. That would be Bixen Span. Or, they're trying to increase their engagement on Twitter because now Elon Musk is paying people. But the honesty of it is, I don't believe these people are that outraged. It is performative. Almost everything on social media is performative. I'm becoming more and more aware of that over time. It's no different than, I think, being on a stage. When you see social media as a stage, the things that people do on social media that have little to no impact on their real life, the things that they say that are not reflected in how they feel in real life, or what reality is. It's no different than I used to have a girlfriend. She used to really trip out on seeing people post wedding pictures and things like that online. And you don't understand that these are snapshots in time. You know, who knows what was going on before that? Who knows what was going on after that? But at least they had that one moment. And I'm realizing that, you know, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, or whatever, a lot of this stuff are just snapshots in time. These are things that are important in the moment, but over time they become less and less important. And you really just stop. It doesn't affect you that much. And it doesn't affect your real life that much. You move on. But online, you can be the happiest couple in the world. You could be the most outraged, progressive wrestling journalist, and then put your phone down and none of that stuff exists. You know, that none of that stuff is real. None of it matters. You spit vitriol all over the internet all day long, and then put your phone down and none of it matters. And then that's when I realized, hey, this is how people are using the internet. There's got to be some kind of incentive structure to it. Financial, power, position, patronage, something like that. We know Bixenspan has used his outrage to garner himself jobs at places like Deadspin and places like Vice, where he became, and he did it again with the Vince McMahon story. He was tweeting out how real news need to collaborate with the wrestling media because Vince McMahon has been able to get away with all this stuff over time because of the media not realizing or not really understanding what wrestling is. It's like there's nothing extra to learn about sex trafficking. All right, there's no storyline element to that. There's no work to that. They got it. They can handle it. You know, the people who handle this kind of thing, they can handle it. They don't need the wrestling nerd to drool all over their story. They don't need that. They don't need you proofreading what they're doing. The issue is they want you to stay on code, right? The wrestling media has a code. Unanimously, I have not seen one wrestling outlet, not one, mention that these accusations could possibly be untrue. It was the same thing with Velveteen Dream. It was the same thing with Matt Riddle. These guys do not look at these stories from multiple angles. They don't ask any questions. There is a code. If you're in the wrestling media, this is what you must believe. This is the frame that you must be operating in. And then these are the people who typically have an issue separating storyline from reality. You know, work from shoot. A lot of these people have those same issues. And it's amazing to me that so many of them think so highly of themselves that they should be on the front line leading the charge, when in reality, they're no different than the everyday activist that you see on TV spouting empty slogans like support victims and all this kind of stuff, instead of actually, you know, doing journalism, which they claim they want to do, which is, hey, let's dig into these claims. Let's look at this claim, because that might mean you say mean things about somebody that you don't know that could possibly be a victim, but you don't want to be ousted from the clique. Is this an industry or is this a clique? Is this a clubhouse? You know, Chris Van Vliet is a guy who he doesn't do the kind of material they want him to do. And that's okay. He doesn't have to. The worst part about all of this is that how successful he is. He's more successful than Bixenspan. He's more successful than Stephanie Chase. He's more successful than so many of these people who are out here criticizing him, some of whom are just bobbleheads on Twitter or Instagram. He's more successful than they are. And he doesn't engage in a lot of the outrage programming that other people engage in. So you can't underestimate, there's a certain level of jealousy to this as well. They see him doing something, they're saying, you shouldn't be doing that, you know? And now they're going to try to control it. I hope it doesn't work. I hope, you know, he's a strong-minded dude, I hope, and he can push through this. But there's no telling. I just wanted to bring this to you guys' attention. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace. Peace out.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap.